In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, comfort the Spirit of truth, who are everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Well, welcome everyone. First of all of you who are present here in person at our humble hall, and all of you who are with us online. We have a great honor and pleasure to welcome Father Nemanja. He recently did his PhD, so we congratulate him on that, and it's a great success, not just for him personally, but also for our church. For too long we have been dumbing down the faith, and I'm sorry, we need really, and we are paying the price for it as the church and Christians in general. And we need more people like Father Nemanja who are, because our faith is a rational faith, and he's a great pleasure to have him here with us. And thank you, Father Nemanja, for being here with us. It's a privilege, and thank you all for coming and attending. And I hope we all learn together, not just learn, but we also, I'm hoping we're going to have a fruitful discussion based on this. The topic is a good topic, but I'm also seeing it's going to be provocative a bit, and it has to be provocative. We usually relate the Serbian or any sort of Orthodox church with this national identity, and we sometimes ask ourselves, well, what is this national identity and then the universal Orthodox Church? So Father Nemanja has prepared the presentation, and I'm going to give him here the microphone.
Thank you, Father. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for all the compliments. Maybe we should save them for later and see if we don't overdo it a little bit. Yes. So as I understood, this is part of a series that you guys have been discussing the church in general, but as part of that, obviously now we have come to the issue of the Serbian Orthodox Church and its place in the wider Orthodoxy. Well, most Serbs initially come to the church, at least these days, because it is Serbian. And most converts come, or inquirers, they come to the church because it is Orthodox. And this implies different expectations from the church from both of these groups, and both groups are right to have those expectations. However, what Jesus Christ expects from all of us is to eventually recognize the true significance of the word church in the Serbian Orthodox Church. And once we understand what the church is, we can appreciate why is it also important to be Serbian or Greek or Russian or Macedonian or Australian or whatever it is, and also Orthodox. And as I understand it, you have already spoken about the church and the nature of the church during the past few weeks. So I'm not going to go into details explaining the nature of one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but for the sake of clarity, I will point out that the church in the scriptures was called Ecclesia. Let me try moving these slides. Ecclesia originally meant an assembly of people summoned together. That's even before it meant the church in the antiquity. And in the Greek Old Testament, or in the Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, this was the word that was used to describe the gathered people of Israel before God. A very specific, not just people of Israel, not just people who are born into that nation, but a very specific group of people of God, Israel, gathered before God. Okay, might be better now. The New Testament adopts this term to describe the community gathered by Christ and the Holy Spirit. not primarily as an institution or a building, as we usually think of the church, but as the people of God assembled in communion, concretely in the Eucharist, the new Israel. The earliest Christian understanding of the church as ecclesia was local and Eucharistic. The church was the community gathered around its bishop to celebrate the Eucharist. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, churches naturally organized themselves according to geographical, cultural, and political realities, giving rise to regional patriarchates such as Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and others. Now, as I go through, this will be a very short overview of the history of the Serbian Orthodox Church with its implications in the culture of the Serbian people. And when I say very short, that's going to be around an hour probably, but we'll try to compress a lot of history in that hour. And I'll try not to banalize that history and not to simplify it, but by nature, when you put it into that kind of a short sort of sorry, I'm trying to admit people as I in those confines, obviously there's going to be some simplifications, but I'll try to impregnate the text with meaning so that we can unpack that later and we can discuss it later. We are often told that ethnic or national churches are a product of the 19th century European societies, which is not entirely correct. Already in the 4th century, the church in Constantinople, for example, was ordaining bishops specifically for certain ethnic groups, such as Goths, the Armenians, Varangians, etc. The church in the East never insisted on exclusive holy languages or abandonment of ethnic traditions. The church in the East, even at that time, aimed to the incarnation of the gospel in native cultures and also the introduction of these cultures into the life of the church. And this is what we call inculturation of the gospel. One of the earliest examples of the inculturation of the gospel was St. Paul's sermon in Athens that happened around 50 AD. You can read that in the Acts of the Apostles. Above all, when this happened, this was not simply St. Paul's personal policy or just his style of ministry. It was essentially the execution of the decisions of the Apostolic Council in Jerusalem that was held in 49 AD. And the Apostolic Council that was convened in Jerusalem happened after the dispute arose in Antioch over whether Gentile converts to Christianity had to be circumcised and follow the Jewish law in order to be saved. The council decided that non-Jews did not have to become Jews in order to become Christians. And this was the turning point in the church's mission, showing that people could follow Christ while retaining their own language, customs, and cultural identity. The gospel was to be brought to every nation, not by making everyone the same, but by transforming each culture from within. Now we go on to case of the Serbs. Serbs are one of the South Slavic tribes that migrated from Central and Eastern Europe into the Balkan Peninsula in the 6th and the 7th centuries. As the Byzantine Empire struggled with invasions and internal challenges, large groups of Slavs crossed the Danube and gradually settled throughout the Balkans, where they mixed with the existing population that was already there. It's quite plausible that minor Slavic groups were already present in that area, but only after the 7th century, from the process of migration and adaptation, emerged the South Slavic peoples of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Bulgarians came later from Asia, and they were Slovanized through mixing with Serbs. And all other Slavic peoples that you can find in the Balkans these days are modern identities that developed in late 19th and up to mid 20th century, some even recently as 20, 30 years ago. At that time, the arrival of the Slavs to the Balkans, they were still pagan, but through contact with Byzantine missionaries, local Christian populations, and especially because of the imperial authorities, the process of Christianization gradually began. Rather than a single dramatic conversion, Christianization of Serbs was slow and a gradual process that unfolded over several centuries. The first significant missionary efforts likely occurred during the reign of Heraclius, early 7th century, who encouraged the baptism of the newly settled Slavs. However, the decisive stage came in the 9th century when Byzantine missionary activity intensified and the work associated with St. Cyril and Methodius and their disciples brought Christianity, literacy, and liturgical life in the local Slavic language. There was a funny anecdote that those Slavs that lived around Thessaloniki in the early 7th century, they had an uprising once against the Byzantine authorities. And after they lost the battle, Emperor Heraclius moved all of them to Syria. And they settled in Syria and came back more than 100 years later when they were converted to Islam in Syria. And when the Islamic forces were attacking Byzantium, they had among those armies, they had a large population of Slavs that originated from this area of Thessaloniki as well. This is the time when traditions such as Krsna Slava, or family patron saint day, was established. Slava for Serbian families is the commemoration of the day of the family patron saint, who is their protector and provider of welfare. And the saint day of each family is the day when their family or the clan that their family belonged to in the antiquity or in the early Middle Ages, when they were Christianized, when they were baptized. Celebration consists of ritual offering of a bloodless sacrifice and a feast that was held for relatives, neighbors, and friends. There's a specially designed candle that is lit in the family home. Wine is poured over Slava bread and wheat as a memory of all the generations that passed the tradition of Slava from one to another until the current celebrants. And during the ritual, thanks are given to the saint and prayers are said for prosperity of the family. Now, at the time, Slava was not as big a tradition as it is these days, but we'll come to that a little bit later. By the 10th century, the Serbs were organized into a number of principalities ruled by local dynasties, the most prominent being the Principality of Raška, which was situated between spheres of influence of the Byzantine Empire and the Bulgarian Empire. And Serbian rulers had to navigate a very complex political landscape, often shifting alliances to preserve their autonomy. Not only political alliances, but also religious alliances, because this was also the border between Eastern and Western Christianity as well. During this period, the foundations of the Serbian state were gradually strengthened through the consolidation of territory, establishment of ruling institutions, and the growing influence of Christianity. In the 11th century, Serbian lands experienced periods of both Byzantine control and local independence. And the most notable Serbian ruler of the area was Stefan Vojislav, who rebelled successfully against Byzantine rule, and he established an independent Duklja, Zeta, in the early 11th century, 1040s. His successor expanded Serbian political influence, and by the end of the century, Serbian rulers had emerged as significant regional powers. And this development laid the groundwork for the rise of the Nemanja dynasty in the late 12th century, under which the Serbian state and church would reach their medieval flourishing. The youngest son of Stefan Nemanja, the founder of the Nemanja dynasty, Saint Sava, is considered the most important figure in Serbian church history. His baptismal name was Rasko. Remember, the name of the country or the state was Raška, similar to Rus or Russia. So all of these back then, there was not even a mention of a state or a country that was named Serbia, but the people of all these little principalities were called Serbs. When Rasko was 17, and he was already a ruler of Herzegovina, you may know this part from the World Cup, if you're following the World Cup. Herzegovina came together with Bosnia to play its part. If you heard of Bosnia and Herzegovina, yeah, the Herzegovina part it's actually named after him, after Saint Sava, because he was the ruler of that part. That's quarter, if not more, of the country. When he was 17, he escaped the royal court and he became a monk on Mount Athos. His father, Nemanja, desperately tried to get him back, but in the end, he joined him as a monk as well. And together they built the Hilandar Monastery as a Serbian monastic center in Mount Athos. Hilandar is not just a monastery for Serbs, but it is also our first official university, first hospital, and so on. After passing of Saint Simeon, which is Nemanja's monastic name, and he was canonized later, he died in 1199. Sava then returned to Serbia, carrying his father's relics and successfully reconciling his brothers who were having a civil war over who's going to inherit the throne. At the beginning of the 13th century, the Orthodox world was undergoing a major crisis following the capture of Constantinople by the Crusaders in the Fourth Crusade in 1204. And the Byzantine imperial court and the ecumenical patriarch established themselves in Nicaea, where they tried to strengthen their alliances with Orthodox peoples throughout the Balkans. Recognizing the growing maturity of the Serbian state and the pastoral needs of its people, Saint Sava traveled to Nicaea and used this opportunity in 1219 and requested church independence of the Serbian Orthodox Church. In 1219, he was indeed consecrated the first Archbishop of the autocephalous, which means autocephalous means own-headed or self-ruling or independent Serbian Orthodox Church. Returning to Serbia, Sava organized the Serbian Church by establishing dioceses and appointing bishops, regulating ecclesial life or church life, and ensuring that the church was governed according to the Orthodox canonical tradition. The establishment of the independent Serbian Orthodox Church in 1219 was a decisive moment in Serbian history. For the first time, the Serbian people possessed an ecclesiastical structure that was led by their own archbishop, serving their own lands and speaking in their own language. Saint Sava founded several dioceses, creating a stable network that connected distant regions of the Serbian realm. He also compiled the Nomocanon, a collection of church and civil laws that became the foundation of legal order in medieval Serbia. Serbia was one of the first countries in Europe to have civil codes and legal codes. Through the church, literacy, education, manuscript production, architecture, iconography, hymnography, even literature flourished. Monasteries became centers of learning, spiritual formation, cultural preservation. This is also the time of the so-called Dark Ages in the Western Europe, and that's why most of this is often overlooked. The lives of Saint Simeon and Saint Sava provided a shared narrative around which Serbian identity developed and was strengthened. The significance of Saint Sava's achievement extended far beyond church administration, and the autocephalous church gave the Serbian people a spiritual and cultural center that united different regions and small feudal rulers into a common Christian civilization. It enabled the faith to be expressed through the Serbian language, local customs, and historical experience, while remaining fully Orthodox and in communion with the wider church. In this way, the Serbian church became not only the guardian of faith, but also the principal bearer of Serbian culture, education, literature, and national memory. The church and the state grew as one organism, with ecclesial and secular traditions interplaying seamlessly in the everyday life of the people. Saint Sava died in 1236, and his incorruptible relics were buried in the Mileševa monastery. For the next 2 centuries, the Serbian state grew in power and in significance until its peak in the 14th century, when Serbia became an empire under Tsar Dusan in 1346, when it ruled almost all of the Balkan Peninsula. This icon here, this fresco from Lesha Monastery, was painted during Sava's life, and it's considered to be an authentic portrait. The decline of the Nemanjić state began after the death of Tsar Dusan in 1355. Under Dusan, Serbia had reached the height of its political power, stretching from the Danube to the Ionian Sea and from the Adriatic to the Black Sea. Serbia was one of the largest states in Southeast Europe. However, the empire proved difficult to hold together. His successor, his son Uroš, lacked the authority to control powerful regional nobles, and the empire gradually fragmented into competing principalities. At the same time, the expanding Ottoman Turks were advancing into the Balkans, taking advantage of political divisions among the Christian states. And by the second half of the 14th century, Serbia was no longer a unified empire, but a collection of semi-independent territories. This happened in the period of about 20 to 30 years, so not overnight, but in the context of history, quite fast. Among the rulers who emerged during this period, Prince Lazar, or Saint Lazar of Kosovo, whose memory we commemorated only a few days ago on Sunday in Vidovdan, he became the most influential. He never ruled all Serbian lands, but he succeeded in creating the strongest Serbian state of the era, and he became a focal point for political and spiritual renewal. He worked closely with the church, and he supported the flourishing monastic movement inspired by the spirituality of Mount Sinai and Mount Athos. He welcomed and supported monks who fled from regions threatened by the Ottomans, including Mount Sinai, and that's how many of the monasteries were started at his time in central Serbia.
Wasn't he also the one to reconcile the schism?
Yes. So when Tsar Dusan proclaimed himself an emperor, he needed a patriarch. Serbian church had an archbishop, but they needed a patriarch to crown him an emperor. He was a king up until this point. So he had a Bulgarian emperor, but he needed another one. So he proclaimed the Serbian church a patriarchate, and they made the Archbishop of Serbia Patriarch of Serbia, which was not really welcomed by the patriarchate in Constantinople. And there was a schism between the Constantinople Patriarchate and the Serbian Patriarchate that went on for about 30 years or so, until Saint Lazar, through his diplomatic efforts, managed to overcome that schism and to bring the two churches into full communion again.
Which tells you why Emperor Dusan is the only Nemanjić that's not a saint, and why we emphasize also Lazar as the one who sort of, for him, spirituality, Christ, and the church had priority in his life.
When we talk about the church back then, it's not, we have to understand that it's not seen as today. There was no clear distinction between secular and ecclesial. So if they needed the church to be a patriarchate for the advancement of the state, that's what's going to happen. There was no considering like, oh, well, what will the clergy from Constantinople say? You know, if at the moment we have a bigger and stronger army and we have more money, then we are asked, we make the moves, you know, we ask the questions and we set the rules. Pretty much the same as today, just today churches are not as involved as they were before. But, you know, that's how people acted back then, but not Lazarus. Even though he could, he had everything at his disposal, he could have acted like that, which would probably even, he would be even more popular among the Serbian noblemen, but that's not the path that he followed. There was even a school of architecture that developed at his time, and monasticism, church culture, and so on. And this movement produced remarkable achievements in architecture, iconography, literature, liturgical life, and it helped to preserve and even to deepen the Orthodox spirituality at a time of great political uncertainty. The most famous event associated with Prince Lazar is the Battle of Kosovo that was fought on the 28th of June, according to today's calendar, in 1389 between Serbian-led Christian forces and the Ottoman Turkish army of Sultan Murat. The battle ended without a clear military victor, and both Lazar and Murat were killed. This is the only Turkish sultan ever to be killed in battle, and Lazar is the only saint in the history of the church who is canonized even though he died in battle. All other soldiers, holy soldiers or holy warriors in the Orthodox Church that are canonized, St. George and many others, they are canonized as martyrs. Lazar is also canonized as martyr, but they did not die in battle. They died standing in sort of in a pacifist way, showing resistance to their captors. But Lazar is the one who died in a battle. Nevertheless, even though it's unclear who actually won, if anyone won, we could talk about it later, but the Ottomans were ultimately better positioned to recover their strength after this. And while the Serbian lands became increasingly dependent on the Turkish power in the decades that followed, for the Serbian Orthodox Church, the significance of Kosovo was not just military. Prince Lazar came to be venerated as a martyr who chose faithfulness to Christ above earthly power. Medieval texts and liturgical hymns presented him as embracing the heavenly kingdom rather than seeking merely earthly success. The spiritual interpretation of Kosovo profoundly shaped Serbian religious consciousness, linking sacrifice, faith, and national identity. Through the cult of Saint Lazar, the Church preserved a vision of Christian witness that sustained the Serbian people during centuries of foreign rule. If you think about it just for a second, when the Turks appeared, like, I don't know, tell me if you know any other example where a medieval ruler had a chance to go into an alliance with an advancing forces much stronger than his, and then join him or them in their quest later. But instead of that, they chose to stand against them and to sacrifice themselves consciously, knowing that they can't possibly win. I don't know if anyone else in history did that. So it's very significant. It's very important, and it's important that we understand that they didn't do this because they were just ignorant or naive or something, but they knowingly did sacrifice themselves in order to preserve something much greater than just earthly power.
Can you please note what Father Nemanja just said before, how much he paid attention to the spirituality, connections with Sinai, Mount Athos. I'll just say one thing. There was a critical edition of the Letter of Divine Ascent published in Serbian Slavonic during Prince Lazar. He sent a delegation to Sinai, Mount Athos, to collect all the known manuscripts of the letter of divine ascent of St. John Climacus, St. John of the Leather, to be published then in Serbian Slavonic at that time, which remains one of the pearls pretty much of the entire Middle Ages, because St. John of the Leather or St. John Climacus was famous not just in the East, but also in West. As you know, you who follow the liturgical calendar, one of the Sundays of the Lent is dedicated to St. John of the Leather and how influential he was. And so you see St. Lazarus, so he wasn't ignorant, he wasn't stupid, he wasn't uneducated. He voluntarily, willingly has chosen Christ and the church. Really.
And that's why when you travel through Europe, for example, if you travel through Western Europe and Central Europe, you'll see many beautiful castles and fortifications from this era. But you will not find that many beautiful manuscripts and beautiful monasteries decorated with very expensive frescoes. You know, Saint Lazar, for example, built Rabanic and stuff. They say that a kilo of that blue pigment that they used for painting of
Lapis
churches,
azul, yeah.
lapis azul, yes, the Byzantine blue, is costed a kilo of gold.
Wow. It was more valuable than gold, yeah.
So you see where they invested their money, the treasury, and that monastery was not just for the noble ones. These were the churches and the monastery that they built. The monks that were there, that were educated to be healers and teachers, that they were for the people, for everybody. So that's why these people were beloved by the people that they ruled over. After the fall of the medieval Serbian state in the 15th century, most Serbian lands came under the Ottoman rule. The Serbian church became the principal institution through which the Serbian people preserved their faith, culture, and historical memory, and their sense of identity. And although the Ottomans generally allowed Christians to practice their religion, they were regarded as second-class citizens, and they faced numerous legal, social, economical restrictions. Churches and monasteries suffered destruction, periods of neglect, extreme taxation, confiscation, and conversion to mosques. And the building of new churches was generally not allowed. Education of clergy was practically impossible. As a result, many aspects of religious life shifted focus from the Eucharistic life to the family and local community. Remember how I spoke a little bit about Slava? This is the time when the celebration of your family patron saint or your Slava and keeping of icons in your home is a sort of focus shifted from being a liturgical thing, being something shared with everybody in the parish, to your private life, to your home. And the transmission of faith was now more dependent on customs and oral traditions, and which became especially important during centuries when public expression of Christian life was, to say the least, limited. The Ottoman authorities governed their Christian subjects through the millet system, in which religious leaders were also responsible for aspects of civil administration. In this context, the Serbian church came to function not only as a spiritual institution, but also as the representative of the Serbian people. The patriarch became both a church leader and also an ethnar, a recognized representative of the Serbian Orthodox population before the Ottoman authorities. This arrangement helped preserve Serbian identity and historical consciousness during centuries without an independent Serbian state. Essentially, the church took over the prerogatives of the state, which was a good thing back then, but it also had its negative aspects that will come later, come a little more prominent later. Serbs never accepted the Ottoman rule and repeatedly started uprisings and very eagerly joined any Christian army that would confront the Ottomans. One of the first and most significant was the Banat uprising in 1594. Banat is the area across the Danube from Belgrade, north of Danube, which is also important to note that there was a big Serbian population there even in the 16th century as well. This is also, at this time, there's a metropolia in Slavonia as well. During this uprising, the Serbian rebels and the Serbian armies that were fighting the Turks, they were carrying banners and churches, banners and flags that had images of Saint Sava on them. In response, the Turks ordered the removal of Saint Sava's relics from the Mileševa monastery, and they publicly burned them in Belgrade to weaken the spirit of the Serbian fighters. Rather than weakening the Serbian identity, this act transformed Saint Sava into an even more powerful symbol of spiritual resistance and national perseverance. His memory continued to unite the Serbian people throughout the Ottoman period, and the site where his relics were burned is where today we have the monumental temple of Saint Sava, or the Saint Sava Cathedral in Belgrade, the largest functioning Orthodox church in the world. Life under Ottoman rule was very harsh, particularly through heavy taxation and the blood tax, where Serbian boys and not just Serbian, but Christian boys throughout the Balkans, but here tonight we're talking about Serbs. They were taken from their families, they were converted to Islam and trained for service in the Ottoman administration and especially in the military. This practice left a very deep mark on the collective memory of the people. At the same time, some Serbs and some Croats converted to Islam, and this is how we got Bosniaks, or people who identify as Bosniaks today. This historical development illustrates how closely religious and ethnic identities became intertwined in the Balkans. For centuries, to be Serbian was commonly understood as being Orthodox. So those who apostatized and who changed their religious identity automatically also changed their ethnic identity. And they were not only, if they stopped being Orthodox or being Christian, they themselves and others as well would not consider them to be Serbs anymore. One notable exception to the Ottoman domination was Montenegro, which preserved its freedom in its mountainous regions. From the late 17th century onwards, Montenegro was governed by bishops from the Petrović-Njegoš dynasty, who combined spiritual and political leadership. In this way, the Orthodox Church directly guided both the religious and public life of the community, ensuring continuity with the medieval Serbian tradition. From one generation to another, the easiest way to improve one's life and secure a better future for one's family was often to convert to Islam. And if any of our grandparents did that, we wouldn't be here tonight. So many Serbs would rather live on a barren mountain peaks and endure the blood tax and hardships and persecution generation after generation for centuries than abandon Saint Sava and Holy Orthodoxy. One of the most significant events in the Serbian history under the Turks or under the Ottoman rule in this era was the Great Migration of Serbs that happened in 1690. During the Great Turkish War, Serbs sided with the advancing Austrian armies that reached Macedonia, hoping for permanent liberation from the Turkish rule. When the Austrian offensive collapsed, the Ottomans returned and they started severe reprisal against the local Serbs. In these circumstances, the Serbian Patriarch Arseniy led tens of thousands of Serbian families north across the Danube into the Habsburg Empire. This migration permanently changed the demographic and ecclesial map of the Serbian people, creating large Serbian communities through present-day Vojvodina, Slavonia, Croatia, Hungary, and southern Austria. The Habsburg rulers welcomed the Serbs because they needed experienced frontier soldiers to defend the empire against the further Turkish attacks. And the Serbs were settled in the military frontier. In Serbian, we say Vojna Krajina. Krajina sounds a lot like Ukraine, right? Ukraina, Krajina. It just means borderlands. This was a vast border zone with the Turks. In exchange for military service, Serbs were promised land, religious freedom, and a certain degree of self-government. For generations, Serbian soldiers served as the first line of defense against the Ottoman incursions. As a result, the Serbian people lived divided between two empires, under Ottoman rule in the south and east, and under Habsburg rule in the north and west. This division profoundly shaped Serbian history, producing different social, cultural, and political experiences while preserving a common Orthodox faith. For example, Father Branko and myself, we come from a region, it's not that far, right? No. Maybe 30, 40, 50 kilometers between us. However, the area where I come from is what this photo is from. It's in today's Croatia or Slavonia, and that's north of the river Sava. That was the Habsburg Empire, Austria. Father Branko is from Banja Luka, which was under the Ottomans. There's not much difference between us. Probably the biggest difference between Serbs or Serbian culture that developed under the Ottomans and the one that developed under the Habsburg is that the people from the Ottoman dominated past, they would remove their shoes when they walk into your house for the first time, and they'll put too much sugar in their coffee. But when it comes to the Orthodox faith, it's pretty much the same. Within the Habsburg Empire, the Serbian Church developed new institutions and became recognized representative of the Serbian people. The center of Serbian ecclesial life gradually shifted to Metropolitanate of Karlovci, a small town about 80 kilometers north from Belgrade, which emerged as the leading Serbian church institution in Austria. Serbian bishops established schools, seminaries, libraries, printing presses, helping preserve Orthodox faith and Serbian culture. Now, the church was the chief guardian of Serbian education, language, and national consciousness in two foreign empires, the Ottoman and the Habsburg. Foreign in religion, culture, and ethnicity. And Serbs were in their homelands, but minority in two different empires. At the same time, Serbian Orthodoxy faced significant challenges from the Roman Catholic authorities in Austria. Throughout the 17th and the 18th century, various efforts were made to encourage or pressure Orthodox Christians to enter into union with Rome while retaining parts of their Orthodox traditions. This process, known as Uniatism, resulted in some communities accepting papal authority and becoming part of the so-called Eastern or Greek Catholic churches. Serbs strongly resisted these efforts, and those who would cave in would again lose not only their religious Orthodox identity, but also their ethnic identity by becoming Croats. The struggle against proselytism reinforced among the Serbs the conviction that Orthodoxy was not merely a religion, but an essential component of their historical identity. As centuries passed, the Serbian church found itself divided among several jurisdictions. The Patriarchate of Peć, as the Serbian church was officially known, had been abolished by the Ottomans in 1766, while Serbian dioceses in Habsburg Empire belonged to the Metropolitanate of Karlovci. Other Serbian lands had ecclesial structures under different political authorities. Following the liberation and the unification of Serbian lands after World War I, and the creation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes that was later renamed Yugoslavia, these separate church bodies sought reunion. And in 1920, the Serbian Patriarchate was formally restored, bringing together Metropolitanate of Karlovci, of Belgrade, dioceses in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Dalmatia, and other Serbian ecclesial territories into one single autocephalous church. At the same time, Yugoslavia raised important questions about identity. While the state promoted a broader Yugoslav identity, many Serbs continued to understand their national identity through the historical framework shaped by the Serbian Orthodox Church, Saint Sava, and the Kosovo tradition. The church, therefore, found itself balancing two roles, supporting the unity of the new state while continuing to preserve the distinct spiritual and cultural heritage of the Serbian people. During this period, the idea of Svetosavlje emerged as an attempt to express Serbian identity through the spiritual legacy of Saint Sava, presenting Orthodoxy not merely as a religion, but as the foundation of Serbian culture, education, and national consciousness. In the modern Kingdom of Serbia, that renewed its independence in the 19th century, Saint Sava's feast day emerged as a key civic and educational holiday. Saint Sava order was the highest church and state decoration. So Saint Sava was declared not only a patron of schools, but even a unifying moral figure for all South Slavs as a figure of local people's religion, distinct from international religious loyalties such as those in Roman Catholicism or Islam. The idea was further politicized in the interval period with the emergence of Svetosavlje. A group of young Orthodox theologians gathered around the Bogomolci movement established a journal named Svetosavlje, which is a play of words from Pravoslavlje, which is the Serbian word for orthodoxy. So Pravoslavlje, Svetosavlje. Svetosavlje comes from Saint Savaism, in a sense. The leadership and many members of the Bogomolci movement in the 1930s joined the conservative political organizations, and during World War II, they stayed loyal to the Serbian Royalist Army with strong anti-communist positions. So during World War II, there was a civil war in Serbia as well. Similar to France, there were two resistance against Germans in Yugoslavia during World War II. One was a royalist or a nationalist, one was a communist. So most of these people who were in the Svetosavlje movement, or almost all of them, were exclusively anti-communist. And this influenced the development of Svetosavlje further, and Pravoslavlje and Orthodoxy and the Serbian culture, not only in Yugoslavia, but also in the diaspora, because the royalists lost the civil war, the communists won, and the royalists were the refugees that went to the Western world, came to Australia, came to America, Canada, France, and so on. And these churches were established, that we are tonight here, were established by these people. Now, when we talk about World War II, we cannot skip over Jasenovac. I initially did, but I had to come back. I did this afternoon. I came back to, we have to speak about this for a little bit as well. This place, Jasenovac, occupies a very unique place in the Serbian Orthodox memory as the largest death camp operated by the Croatian Ustaša regime. 700,000 Serbs, along with Jews and Gypsies, Roma, were killed there. Not in gas chambers, not as an industry of death, as it happened in the German death camps, but they were slaughtered by hand. To make things even worse, commanders of the camp were often Catholic priests, and many Catholic clergy took very active roles, hands-on, in genocide and in forced conversions. The Serbian Church today commemorates the holy new martyrs of Jasenovac and views their witness through the lens of Christ's suffering and resurrection. As Kosovo symbolizes sacrifice for the heavenly kingdom in the medieval Serbian memory, Jasenovac stands as a modern reminder of the cost of faithfulness, preserving the memory of suffering, endurance, forgiveness, and the dignity of those who refuse to abandon the faith of Saint Sava and their Serbian identity. So it was very easy not to end up in Jasenovac. You could just convert, but many would not, or would not, even for the sake of their life. Now, on the left, you see, I'd say an icon. I see that here on your walls, you have a lot of these icons from Nun Maria, is that right?
Yeah, I think we have it all. Stroll around, Blake.
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're really, she reinvented the memory of Jasenovac. They are just fantastic. And I had a look at many images of actual camp and people who were slaughtered, and I thought maybe this is just much better to illustrate what Jasenovac was. That's on the left. On the right, you see the altar table in Jasenovac, in the Serbian church that is today a Serbian monastery in Jasenovac. This is during the Croatian invasion in 1905 of this area, when local Serbs were completely ethnically cleansed. You see that on the altar table, you see the holy chalice, you see the antimension that was carefully opened. It's not just, see how the military jacket and that hat is just thrown onto that, but these relics are carefully opened to be examined. And then you see local cans of spam and bread, and someone was having lunch, and rakia and water, beer, can of beer over there, placed on the altar table. These are images from 1995, not from the Middle Ages, from people who claim to be Christians, entering a very holy site in a place where one of the greatest genocides happened only less than half a century before. It tells you a lot about why Serbs would be very, what's the word? Touchy or careful, sensitive, skeptic when it comes to discussions of ecumenical, let's say, well, not even union is not off the table completely, but let's say conversations or just discussions. You know, we have
even dialogue.
Even dialogue is in question, but not because we are just not simply because, or not exclusively because we are stubborn, but also we have a good reason as well. Experience, exactly. Thank you. The concept of Svetosavlje or Saint Savaism, but not really an ism, came to define a distinctive form of Serbian Orthodox identity that merged faith ethnicity or nationhood, and moral purpose. Rooted in Saint Sava's historical role as the founder of the autocephalous Serbian Church and the cultural architect of medieval Serbia, Svetosavlje was revitalized in this period primarily by theologians of the Bogomolci movement, such as Saint Justin Popović and Saint Nikolai Velimirović. I'm sure that you've heard of both of them before. In 1953, Saint Justin published a book called Svetosavlje as the Philosophy of Life, which was a compilation of lectures he had offered to the Serbian youth during the German occupation of Serbia. In the preface, Saint Nikolai provides a precise definition of Svetosavlje as Orthodox Christianity of Serbian style and experience. What they aimed for was to bring politics closer to the religious ideal. However, in the process, the religious ideal also became secularized to the point where the boundary between political and the religious began to blur. Now, when he had this series of lectures, Svetosavlje as the Philosophy of Life, this wasn't just sort of he was bored and didn't have anything else to do, so he decided to, organize a series of lectures. But at the time, entire Europe, well, those parts that were not in concentration camps, but even before the war, like in the 1920s and especially in the 1930s, up until and during the war as well, philosophy of life was the greatest question in Europe. Everybody was discussing it. Everybody was talking about it. What's the point? Why are we here? What do we do with our life? And as secularization already took its root in Western Europe, it was much harder and harder to find some meaning in religious worldview. And all of these ideologies that were so strong at the time, they were dominated by, communism, fascism, Nazism, anything that you can name back then had a much greater strength, even democracy, than it does today. It was completely different. So this is why following World War II and the rise of the communist Yugoslavia, Svetosavlje was pushed into a private sphere. Although public religious expression was repressed, devotion to Saint Sava quietly persisted in homes, parishes, and particularly among the diaspora communities that fled communism and came to the Western or free world. Small Serbian communities existed in, maybe we should skip one more.
Oh.
Right? All right, so yeah. Okay. Coming to an end now. We'll just say a few words about our diaspora as well, but we'll focus on Australia. Small Serbian communities existed in Australia since the late 19th century, but there was no organized church life until after World War II. Since the 1940s, there were three major waves of Serbian migration to Australia. The first wave consisted of so-called DPs, or displaced persons, and anti-communist refugees who left Yugoslavia in the late 1940s and early 50s. They founded the first Serbian church school communities that were dedicated primarily to Saint Sava, but these institutions often functioned as both religious and cultural centers. And the early life of the Serbian church and the Serbian community in Australia was heavily shaped by unresolved political conflicts carried over from wartime Yugoslavia. So when I said that there were two main resistance, one royalist, one communist, after the communists won, the royalist resistance was divided into at least 4 or 5 different fractions that hated each other more than the communists. And these are the people that came outside of Yugoslavia, and these are the people that started organizing Serbian communities around the world. These tensions contributed to the so-called American Schism that started in 1963 in America, and in 1964 came to Australia. It's called American because it started in America with the Serbian Bishop of America. It happened because the Serbian diaspora split between those loyal to the Patriarchate in Belgrade and the so-called Free Serbian Orthodox Church that was based in America. And it was predominantly political. It was about, who's more under or free from influence of the Communist Party in Yugoslavia. The division spread through Australia in 1964, resulting in parallel parishes, monasteries, and church structures. And during the second migration wave, which began after communist Yugoslavia liberalized immigration in the late 1960s, church life expanded significantly. New monasteries, diocesan structures, and organizations were established, yet ethnic and political concerns still overshadowed the spiritual life. Despite their divisions, both sides of the schism continued to look to Saint Sava as the symbol of authentic Serbian identity and unity. Efforts toward reconciliation intensified in the late 1980s and early 1990s, particularly through the figures such as Archimandrite Nikanor of Hilandar and Patriarch Pavle, whose appeals for unity resonated deeply throughout the community. Ultimately, the schism was overcome less through theological agreement than through a shared commitment to political unity of Serbs, especially as Serbs in former Yugoslavia faced war and persecution during the 1990s. Saint Sava thus functioned as a powerful cultural and national symbol capable of bringing divided communities back together. The third migration wave arrived between 1996 and 2001, largely consisting of refugees from the wars in Croatia and Bosnia. This generation was much less burdened by the ideological disputes of earlier migrants and contributed significantly to healing all divisions. Their efforts culminated in the administrative reunification of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Australia and New Zealand, which happened only in 2011, and refocusing towards the universal as much as national identity. Now, in recent years, we see that alongside the descendants of the Serbian migrants, increasing numbers of Australians from non-Serbian backgrounds have embraced Orthodoxy and found their spiritual home within Serbian parishes. Their presence has encouraged the Church to become more accessible to the wider Australian society through the increased use of English in worship and education, development of catechumen and youth programs, publication of resources in English, and the establishment of ministries that address the pastoral needs of contemporary Australia. As a result, a distinctly Australian expression of Serbian Orthodoxy is gradually taking shape. At the same time, most converts do not seek to remove the Serbian characters of the Church. On the contrary, many are attracted precisely because of its rich spiritual tradition, history, liturgical life, and connection to the legacy of Saint Sava, Saint Lazar, Kosovo legacy, etc. They generally understand that the Serbian identity of the Church is not an accidental feature, but result of centuries of historical experience, having learned about the Ottoman persecution, the preservation of faith through the Patriarchate, the Kosovo tradition, the struggles against assimilation, Uniatism, and the role of the Church in maintaining Serbian identity without a state. Converts often develop a deep appreciation for the inseparable relationship between Orthodoxy and Serbian national identity. The contemporary Serbian Orthodox Church in Australia therefore finds itself in a very unique position. It is becoming more universal in its membership while remaining faithful to its Serbian heritage. The challenge is not to choose between Serbian and being Orthodox, but to demonstrate how a particular historical tradition can serve the universal mission of the Church. In this way, the growing presence of converts is helping the Church rediscover something that has been true since the time of Saint Sava, that Orthodoxy can take root in new cultures without abandoning the spiritual inheritance that gave it its life. So, in conclusion, I believe that Australian Orthodoxy, compared to Serbian Orthodoxy, is in its, let's say, 8th century. Same as what Serbs were experiencing in the 8th century, in a way Australia is experiencing today. The same way that the Byzantine and Greek influences are very deep and inseparable from Serbian Orthodoxy, and to this day they are not only present but carefully preserved and cherished. So also in 300-400 years, when there is a strong, flourishing Australian Orthodox Church, I believe influences from Serbian, Macedonian, Russian, Greek, and Antiochian and other Orthodox churches will also be cherished and preserved and important for its identity and for its future. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Nemanja. I would now ask everyone to consider asking some questions or commenting, suggesting, accusing. If you have any accusations, if you have any comments, any questions, yeah, please feel free to express yourself. Even those people who are online, you're welcome to.
Feel free to unmute yourself now.
Yes.
Father Nemanja, there was also a large influx of Russian Orthodox into Serbia after the imposition of communism in Russia in
Yes.
18 and 19. And I've read about a number of priests who went to Serbia and then became bishops, and then after communism took hold in Serbia, they again uprooted and
It followed them, yes.
Well, yes, so they went to the and US.
Russians came to like a large Russian population, large part of Russian refugees after the Bolshevik Revolution ended up in Yugoslavia. King Alexander I, Karađorđe of Yugoslavia, was very close to the royal family of Russia. He was supposed to marry one of the daughters of Holy Emperor Nicholas, but they all ended up as martyrs. So he passionately hated communism. During his lifetime, Yugoslavia never recognized Soviet Union as an independent state. They still had their imperial Russian consulate there, and all the Russian soldiers, engineers, actors, they were all more than welcome to come, and they were all offered positions in the Yugoslav army or Yugoslav state and so on. And these people brought with them a lot of cultural influence as well, a lot of Orthodox influence. One of them is St. John Maksimovic. St. John Maksimovic, funny enough, his family migrated from those northern parts. So I mentioned the great migration of Serbs in 1690s. So in the 17th and 18th century, there was also another migration from there when the Roman Catholics started proselytizing and forcing people into Uniatism, and when they lost some of their privileges as army officers, one group of Serbs from that area moved to today's Ukraine. Well, pretty much where the war is fought these days. There's even a part of that area today that's called Novoserbia or New Serbia, similar names. And his family was one of those that moved over there. They were they assimilated to Russian, but then they came back. He studied theology in Belgrade, and later on he taught there. And there was a monastery, very influential but not that well known, called Milkovo, where there was a lot of Russian monastic influence there, a lot of significant Russian spiritual leaders that gathered there. One of them would later become an Archbishop of Australia in the Russian church in Roko, Archbishop Sava. There was also, and I forgot his name, there was another...
Well, Roko was born in Yugoslavia.
Roko was born in Yugoslavia as well, in Karlovci. Yeah. So the Metropolitan of Karlovci that I mentioned, that was...
I think Archbishop Sava is buried at Cabramatta.
He's buried in Rookwood.
He's in Rookwood.
Yes. But he was a married priest before he became a monk, and his wife was Serbian. He was very fluent in Serbian, and he's the reason why Serbs didn't have a bishop here for first 20 years or so, because they were so close to him. He consecrated most of the churches, ordained priests and so on. So that Metropolitanate of Karlovci, when the Serbian church was reunited, the see of the Serbian church moved from Karlovci to Belgrade, and the facilities that remained in Karlovci were given to Roko, which was established in Karlovci exactly in Serbian Patriarchate. And yeah, Serbian culture, architecture, and everything is very much influenced by the Russian refugees who stayed there not that long, only until 1940s. And then, yeah, they had to.
The change of management in Serbia.
Yes, exactly. So communism followed them, and
Yes.
then they came here, and now we're just waiting for communism to follow them here.
No.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Yeah. There was, I remember reading accounts of some of them were going from Serbia to the US and then moving as they grew and learned, becoming bishops in the US and also England as well.
Russians?
Yes.
Yeah, the Russians. There's also Serbs as well. So Serbs moved to a Serbian diaspora is a bit older in America than in Australia. We had people moving there from the 19th century. The first Serbian diocese in America was established in the 1920s. And we already have 3 or 4 Serbian saints in America, and at least one of them who was born in America, born in San Francisco, and raised in America, and became a monk later, a bishop and a saint. So hopefully Australia will follow in those footpaths as well.
Okay, any other questions or comments, or anyone online there?
No, you know what? Just a comment. It's actually really nice to hear someone give praise to how strong our faith is. Like within the Serbs, how many lives were given and they still wouldn't budge for our faith. That's actually really nice to hear on a public front like this. Just saying.
Thank you. Quite a lot. Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll call it the night then. And I'm just going to take this opportunity once again to thank Father Nemanja for his efforts and sacrifices and traveling all the way from Sydney here to Wollongong and to prepare this presentation. Well, yes, it is an hour and a half drive. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. And please stay. We have some pizza here. Thank you, Anice, for organizing this pizza and some drinks. And I'm sorry, you guys, you can have your own dinner there. All right.
Thank you,
Have a
Father.
good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Father.
Father.
One.
Thank you.